July 20th, 1944. Deep inside Hitler's heavily guarded headquarters known as the Wolf's Lair, the air shook with an explosion. A powerful bomb, planted during a high-level military briefing, detonated with deadly force. For a few terrifying seconds, smoke and fire filled the wooden conference room, and silence fell upon East Prussia. The conspirators believed their plan had worked. Hitler was finally gone. But within hours, devastating news spread. Hitler had survived. The assassination attempt, now remembered as the July 20th plot, had failed. And with that failure came swift and merciless consequences. One of the most important figures linked to this conspiracy was Field Marshal Erwin von Witzleben, a decorated officer of the German army. He was not just another participant. He was chosen to command Germany's armed forces if the plot succeeded. His role was crucial, his rank unmatched, and his name carried authority across the Wehrmacht. But when Hitler emerged alive from the wreckage, Witzleben's fate was sealed. How did a man who had dedicated his life to Germany's military service become a so-called traitor in the eyes of the Nazi regime? What drove him, an aristocrat and a field marshal, to risk his career, his honor, and ultimately his life to stand against Hitler? To understand this, we need to look back decades before the bomb, to the traditions, battles, and choices that shaped his destiny. Early life and military roots. Erwin von Witzleben was born on December 4th, 1881 in Breslau, Prussia, into an aristocratic family with a long tradition of military service. His father, Georg von Witzleben, had served as a captain in the Prussian army, and the family name was steeped in duty and discipline. Growing up in this environment, it was almost expected that Erwin would wear the uniform of a soldier. In 1901, at the age of just 20, he joined the Grenadier Regiment. His early years as a young officer coincided with Germany's growing ambitions under Kaiser Wilhelm II. Witzleben absorbed the strict code of the Prussian military, loyalty to the state, discipline above all else, and an unwavering commitment to duty. Baptism by fire in World War I. When World War I erupted in 1914, Witzleben went straight to the front lines. He first served as an adjutant in the 19th Reserve Infantry Brigade before taking command of his own company. His service took him to some of the most brutal battles of the Western Front, Verdun, Champagne, and Flanders. The war left physical and emotional scars. Witzleben was seriously wounded, but he never abandoned his post. His courage earned him both classes of the Iron Cross, a symbol of honor that marked him as an officer of exceptional ability. By the end of the war, he was not just a survivor, but a proven leader. The struggle of the interwar years. Germany's defeat in 1918 was crushing, not only for the nation, but for its soldiers. The Treaty of Versailles reduced the once mighty German army to just 100,000 men. For career officers like Witzleben, this was both humiliating and dangerous. It meant adapting to a smaller, limited army under constant suspicion from the Allies. Still, Witzleben persevered. He continued to serve in the Reichswehr, the reduced army of the Weimar Republic. By the early 1920s, he had risen to the rank of major, and by 1931, he had become a colonel commanding Infantry Regiment No. 8 in Frankfurt. His steady rise showed not only his skill, but also his resilience in an era of political and military instability. First impressions of Hitler. When Adolf Hitler came to power in 1933, many officers initially saw him as a strong leader who could restore Germany's pride and rebuild its armed forces. Witzleben was among those who cooperated, and that year he was given command of Military District 3rd in Berlin, a highly prestigious position. Yet even as he rose quickly through the ranks under the Nazi regime, doubts began to creep in. Witzleben was a man of discipline and tradition, and Hitler's erratic, ruthless methods disturbed him deeply. Cracks in loyalty. The first real test of Witzleben's loyalty came in 1934 during the infamous Night of the Long Knives. Hitler ordered the elimination of dozens of rivals, including two highly respected military figures, General Kurt von Schleicher and Ferdinand von Bredow. Many officers remained silent, unwilling to challenge the Führer. But Witzleben, alongside other generals like Erich von Manstein and Gerd von Rundstedt, demanded an official inquiry. This act of defiance marked him as someone unafraid to question Hitler. The relationship between the field marshal and the dictator deteriorated further in 1938 during the Blomberg-Fritsch affair. Hitler engineered the downfall of General Werner von Fritsch with false accusations of homosexuality, clearing the way for loyalists. Witzleben openly criticized this injustice, a dangerous move that led to his temporary retirement. The reluctant return. Despite sidelining him, Hitler could not ignore Witzleben's military expertise. With Germany preparing for war, the field marshal was recalled to active duty. But his return did not mean renewed loyalty. On the contrary, it gave him a closer look at Hitler's reckless military decisions, which only deepened his doubts. By this time, Witzleben had already crossed a dangerous line. In 1937, he joined Hans Oster and other officers in what became known as the Oster Conspiracy. This group of high-ranking officers secretly plotted to remove Hitler, fearing that his aggressive plans would drag Germany into another disastrous war. The Oster Conspiracy and Early Resistance. The conspirators hoped to act if Hitler gave the order to invade Czechoslovakia. Witzleben, who controlled the Berlin Defense District, was in a key position to secure the capital during a coup. Meetings were held in secrecy, coded messages exchanged, and careful plans drafted. Each man knew that discovery would mean certain death. But when Britain and France signed the Munich Agreement in 1938, giving Hitler the Sudetenland without a fight, the conspirators' justification collapsed. With war temporarily avoided, the plan was abandoned. Even so, Witzleben's opposition to Hitler only grew stronger. He joined another plot in 1939, organized by Generaloberst Kurt von Hammerstein-Eckward, which aimed to eliminate Hitler during an inspection of the Siegfried Line. But the plan fell apart when Hitler never showed up. Command on the Western Front. Despite his resistance ties, Witzleben remained a prominent figure in Germany's military campaigns. In 1939, he took command of the First Army during the invasion of France. His forces successfully broke through the Maginot Line, forcing French divisions to surrender. For this, he was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, and in 1940, promoted to Field Marshal. In May 1941, he replaced Rundstedt as Commander-in-Chief of the Western Front. Yet his criticisms of Hitler's decisions, especially the invasion of the Soviet Union, once again put him at odds with the regime. Officially, he resigned for health reasons, but many historians believe he was pushed out because of his opposition. The turning point. By the early 1940s, with defeats mounting at Stalingrad and in North Africa, Witzleben became convinced that Hitler was leading Germany to ruin. His opposition was no longer just about personal doubts, it was about saving the nation from destruction. He remained in contact with resistance figures, preparing for the day when action would be possible. That day would come in July 1944. By 1944, the war was turning against Germany. The Eastern Front had collapsed after Stalingrad, and Allied forces had landed in Italy. Within the German officer corps, more and more believed that Hitler had to be stopped before he destroyed the nation completely. Out of this desperation emerged Operation Valkyrie, the most famous attempt to remove Hitler from power. Witzleben, though no longer in active command, was central to the plan. The conspirators needed a respected figure of unquestioned authority to take over once Hitler was gone. His name carried weight not just among soldiers, but also among civilians. They trusted him because he was not a politician or fanatic. He was a field marshal, decorated in both world wars, a man whose loyalty had always been to Germany itself. The role assigned to Witzleben. The resistance leaders designated Witzleben as commander-in-chief of the Wehrmacht after Hitler's assassination. His task was clear. Once confirmation came that Hitler was dead, He would travel to the Bendler block in Berlin, assume command of all coup forces, issue orders to secure the capital, and oversee the arrest of Nazi leaders. His presence was expected to unify hesitant officers and give legitimacy to the new provisional government. The provisional government's structure had already been drafted. General Ludwig Beck was to serve as head of state, Karl Goerdeler as chancellor, and Witzleben as the military leader. Together, they hoped to end the dictatorship and negotiate peace with the Allies before Germany was destroyed. The day of the bomb, July 20th, 1944. At exactly 12:42 p.m., Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a bomb inside Hitler AS conference room at the Wolf S. Lair. He quickly left the room, believing that within minutes the dictator would be dead. The explosion was devastating, killing several officers and injuring many others. Conspirators in Berlin immediately launched Operation Valkyrie, convinced the mission had succeeded. But fate turned against them. The heavy oak table shielded Hitler from the full force of the blast, and he survived with only minor injuries. Within hours, radio stations were broadcasting Hitler's voice, confirming he was alive. Meanwhile, Witzleben was delayed. Instead of arriving at the Bendler block early in the afternoon as planned, he did not reach Berlin until around 8 p.m., hours too late. By then, the coup was already collapsing. Officers who had initially followed Valkyrie orders began switching back to Hitler AS side after hearing he was still alive. Chaos reigned. According to witnesses, Witzleben entered the Bendler block, surveyed the confusion, and exclaimed bitterly, "This is chaos! What have you done?" His disappointment was clear. After only 45 minutes, realizing the plot had failed, he left. The collapse and arrest. By nightfall, Operation Valkyrie was over. The Gestapo and Loyalist officers regained full control of Berlin. The resistance network crumbled, with arrests sweeping across the country. On July 21st, just a day after the attempt, Witzleben was arrested at his country estate near Berlin. He was taken into custody by General Victor Linars, who had been ordered to move quickly against conspirators. Despite his age and status as a field marshal, Witzleben was treated not as a decorated soldier, but as a criminal. A so-called court of honor expelled him from the army, stripping away his military titles and honors. This was done deliberately to ensure he would be tried not by a military tribunal, but by the infamous People's Court, overseen by the fanatical judge Roland Freisler. The People's Court and humiliation. In August 1944, Witzleben was brought before Freisler in one of the most infamous show trials of the Third Reich. The proceedings were designed not to uncover truth, but to publicly humiliate and degrade the accused. Witzleben was made to appear in ill-fitting trousers without a belt, forcing him to hold them up as he stood before the court. When he tried to adjust them, Freisler mocked him, shouting, "How dare you adjust your trousers in this court?" The once proud field marshal was paraded as a broken figure, the Nazis aiming to strip him of every last shred of dignity. Yet Witzleben did not cower. He remained defiant, even in the face of Freisler's insults. At one point, he warned the judge with prophetic words, "You can hand us over to the executioner. In 3 months, the outraged and tormented people will call you to account and drag you through the filth of the streets alive." Those words, spoken by a man who knew he was about to die, reflected his conviction that justice would one day come. And indeed, less than a year later, Germany lay in ruins and Hitler's regime collapsed. Execution at Plötzensee Prison. On August 8, 1944, Witzleben's life came to an end at Plötzensee Prison in Berlin. But Hitler, furious at the betrayal of his officers, ordered that the executions be carried out in a particularly degrading way. Instead of the traditional military firing squad, Witzleben and others were hanged by thin ropes on meat hooks, a method designed to prolong suffering and deny them a soldier's death. The executions were filmed for propaganda purposes, but the footage was never released. Even Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, feared that the grotesque brutality might provoke sympathy for the condemned men. And so a man who had served Germany in 2 world wars, who had reached the highest rank in the military, and who had tried to save his country from destruction, was killed like a criminal. His body, like those of other conspirators, was buried in an unmarked grave to erase his memory. Legacy of courage. Though the Nazis attempted to brand him a traitor, history remembers Erwin von Witzleben differently. He was not perfect. Like many officers, he initially cooperated with Hitler. But when faced with the reality of tyranny, he chose resistance over blind loyalty. His courage in the July 20th plot places him among those who dared to defy one of the most feared regimes in history. His words at trial continue to echo as a reminder that even in the darkest times, voices of conscience can rise. Today, streets, schools, and memorials across Germany bear the names of Witzleben and his fellow conspirators. They stand as symbols of a Germany that resisted, however late, and of the high price paid by those who tried to end the nightmare from within. Closing Erwin von Witzleben's story is not just about one man. It is about the moral struggle of an entire generation of soldiers caught between loyalty to their oath and loyalty to their conscience. In the end, Witzleben chose conscience. And though it cost him his life, his defiance ensured that he would be remembered not as a traitor, but as a man who stood for honor when it mattered most. So when we think of July 20th, 1944, and the failed attempt to end Hitler's rule, we should remember not only the explosion in the Wolf's Lair, but also the courage of men like Field Marshal Erwin von Witzleben.